Welcome to My Life, Chassidus Applied, episode 57. Dedicated in honor of the birthday of Shiri Yehudis Pesa Bas Chaya Esther. Well, let's begin with a contest, which just concluded this past Thursday night, Chassidishe Adar. And beyond all of our expectations, over 500 submissions came in, which is amazing. How many people invested their time to kochzich, to learn, to be ma'ayin, to delve into and plumb the treasures of Chassidus and bring it into some form of application. So now the judging has begun. The judges have begun to review the essays. And Mitzvah Hashem, we hope to, by the end of this month, to be able to announce the winners. And those of you that did not have time to submit, there's always going to be next year, and maybe some other surprises before that as well. But again, thank you all for participating. It's really been a very exciting, due to the mere fact of so many people in so many different directions, Ein Deis and Shabbos, from different perspectives, all learning different aspects of Chassidus and applying it. So thank you again. Over 500 submissions. I mean, that alone tells you that it's touched a chord, and the great need, both within our community, within all communities, for Chassidus applied to our lives, which is essentially preparing the world and ourselves for the Geula, which is a life aligned with the way the Eibishter God wanted us to be, the best we can be, where our faculties and our conscious and unconscious, and all our levushim and our garments and forms of expression are all aligned to the purpose for which we were put here in the first place. So, and hence, we continue the series of My Life Chassidus Applied. Thank you so much for your questions. Keep coming in, and I feel that it's as fresh as the first episode. Though that also surprised me. I did not know we would still be doing this by now, but that just shows again the need for it, and the response, which has been phenomenal, and the feedback, as well as your participation, because all this is based on your questions, meaning questions about the human condition that each of us struggle with, each of us deal with, and we will continue addressing them as best of my ability, using the Maimorim and Sichos of the Rabbeim, which is based, of course, on an extension of Teira B'chlal, Teira Shebiksav, and Teira Shebal Peh. But as has become the custom in the past few weeks, it's been to begin by something that's timely, Leben mit der Zeit, living with the times, as the Alter Rebbe cryptically once said, Mitaf Leben mit der Zeit. And later, when the Chassidim asked, what does that mean? The Mittler Rebbe came to explain the times. Zeit means that the Teira was melernt in jener Zeit. So living with the times, today some people may think means the New York Times, but long before there was a New York Times, but long before there were all newspapers, there was the time of the year, which each week of the 52 weeks of the year corresponding to a particular parsha. Each parsha breaks into 7 sections corresponding to each day. So in effect, every day of the 52 weeks of the year has a corresponding section of the Teira Midvas Melept. And that's teaching you the true life, more than the temporary and the immediate. What is the energy, so to speak? What are the vibes? What are the energy flows of this particular time of the year? And therefore, what channel should we be creating? What containers, kalim, should we be crafting in order to channel this energy of this time? So this Shabbos will be reading both Parsha Tetzaveh and Parsha Zochor. It's the second of the 4 parshas that we read, Shkolim, Zochor, Porah, and HaChedish, that begins from Rosh Chodesh Shabbos Mevarchim or Rosh Chodesh Adar all the way till the Shabbos Mevarchim Nisan. So these 4 parshas, there's many things in Chassidus that talk about them. So we'll have taken our second Sefer Teira, and not only do you read the parsha in the regular flow, in the regular order of the 52 chapters, we also read an additional section from Kiseitze, from about the parsha Zochor she'oslecha Amalek, to remember what Amalek did to it. Of all the parshas in the Teira, parsha Zochor is all Cholu Alma is midaraisa. That means both for men and women, it's obligation from the Teira to listen to Zochor, because it's a mitzvah daraisa to remember. Whereas Parsha Porah, there are opinions that it's not daraisa. There are a number of sichos where the Rebbe addresses this and all the opinions. But the bottom line, what this underscores is how important, more than any other parsha, this is the only parsha in the week that's midaraisa. Even parshas, even Kriyas HaTeira is not necessarily midaraisa, even though it's based on certain psukim, but A daraisa mitzvah that you have to read and hear, the parasha of Zochor is this week, which of course begs the question, why? What is so significant about this parasha of all parashas, a negative thing, remembering what Amalek did to us when we left Egypt? So Chassidus has a number of explanations, and it couldn't be more fitting to the series of My Life Chassidus Applied, because Amalek represents some of the most severe and toxic forces in our psychological makeup that assault the psyche and assault the human being and become a block, an impediment. So as we know, Chassidus, all the characters and all the events and all the episodes and narratives in the Torah are not just they happened when they happened, but they're not just merely events that happened back then, but they're actually spiritual events that are happening right now. Indeed, as the Shalah and the Rameh Mepane write, it's not Torah medaberes betachtenim meramezes be'elyenim, that the Torah speaks about things down below and alludes to and hints to things up there. The opposite is true. The Torah precedes the world, which means the Torah is the blueprint by which the world was created. So first comes Torah, then the events in the world. And Araisa Kuchabrichu Kol Echad, and Araisa's Kodema precedes the Torah, precedes the world. Stako Baraisa Bara Alma. God looked into the Torah, and with that He created the world. So Chassidus explains that the Torah preceded events in existence. In the Torah, it's all on a spiritual level. The Torah of Atzilus, the Torah of higher worlds, the Torah of Ak is sometimes compared to the level of Torah where there's the whole picture of existence. Of course, there it's on a spiritual state, and then it evolves into events that took place on earth. So when for example, you're reading the Torah about Yetzias Mitzrayim, technically that didn't happen till later years, in the second millennia. And yet, it's Nitzchi. And it says, Kaimu kol ha-Torah kulo, kaidim shenitna, the Ovis fulfilled the entire Torah before it was given, and they studied Torah. So what did they study? They studied the Ruchnis of Yetzias Mitzrayim, because the Ruchni is the message of leaving Egypt, is leaving from, as Chassidus says, Mitzrayim, from the word limitations, confines, constraints, all the inhibitions and all the limits of existence is what Mitzrayim alludes to, both Mitzrayim of Gedusha and Mitzrayim of Klippah. They're positive constraints, they're negative constraints. And therefore, that's why it's so fundamental, because Yetzias Mitzrayim is the basis of all of existence. How to transcend, to leave the Mitzarim, Begvulim, the limitations that confine us, whether it's the fears and inhibitions we have, whether it's the limitations of existence to connect to the infinite and the divine, eternal divine. However you interpret it, Yetzias Mitzrayim is a central component, which is why it's so central in all the mitzvahs. Well, every day we have also Zochor Yetzias Mitzrayim, together with Zochor Amalek, and why Pesach is such a fundamental Yom Tov, and why we have to envision as if we're leaving Egypt every generation, B'chol Day V'Day, and every day, as the Alter Rebbe adds in Tanya. Why? Why not just say, commemorate it, remember it? Actually, as we leaving Egypt, because every day we're leaving the Mitzarim V'Gvulim, we should be leaving. So it's actually an obligation for us all the time. Then there was a point in history where it manifested, and it took place in a particular year, in a particular location, geography. But the spiritual idea precedes Mitzrayim Begashmis and is relevant even after we left Egypt. And the same thing with Amalek. That though Amalek was a particular nation that attacked the Jews when they left Egypt, as related in the Parsha B'Shalach that we read a few weeks ago, yet Amalek represents an archetype, a model of a particular force in our lives that exists today as well. That we have to do everything possible, number one, to remember it, and number two, to eradicate it. And to remember to eradicate it. And what is that? So Chassidus speaks about Amalek in several ways. First of all, Amalek gematria is Suffolk. Suffolk. Amalek represents doubts, which includes confusion. Another thing, Asher Korcha Baderech, represents krirus, kaltkeit, apathy, which can be seen as an outgrowth of doubts. Then it represents Chutzpah. Amalek represents Reishis Goyim Amalek, the Deresh of Klippus, the Amalek of Keser of Klippah. Amalek is Chutzpah, Yeshus and Chutzpah, arrogance, sheer arrogance. And some places it talks about Amalek also in the context of narcissism, in the yeshus that is completely consumed with me and nothing else. Now each of these can be analyzed, obviously, exhaustively, but basically, in the context of my life, Chassidus applied, Amalek represents, I'm going to focus on the few things I just mentioned, the doubts. We all have doubts. Ein simcha kataras asfekus. There's no joy than relieving and resolving a doubt, or doubts. So even if you make a mistake, it's better to make a move than to remain paralyzed, which of course is connected to the apathy. The kaltkeit, Amalek saying, don't get so excited about things. Don't get so inspired. Elam kiminaganei, this is the way of the world. Apathy is a kiss of death. Just like doubt, suffix. Apathy creates an apathetic, cold attitude to things, which takes away, saps out the passion and the vitality and the energy of life. So it's actually a form of death. And that's why the Torah makes us so adamant about these elements. So how do we challenge and how do we repair or how do we remember? So first of all, remember. By being aware of these forces and being aware of their effect on us, that alone is the beginning of the healing, because you're not becoming complacent. You recognize that there are these forces in our lives, and we live in a world where it's easy to enter into the zone of doubts or in the zone of apathy. And we'll get to Chutzpah in a minute. And so it's about remembering it, which is why it's a mitzvah, that every person goes to remember the Amalek of the past, but Amalek of our times, Amalek within us. When you're aware of it, you shine the light on it. That itself is the way we solve things, which is the whole basis of Chassidus Bechlal and this series called Chassidus Applied, My Life. The idea of shining the light on ourselves, on our souls, on our psyches, and by being aware of our own condition, by being know thyself, that alone begins to cure the situation. But what taka is the way to fight the battle of Amalek? So look, like it says in the pasuk, Muhammad Hashem b'Hashem me'der der. That means there's Amalek in every generation, as I just said, spiritually, even physically, but especially spiritually. So the way we win the Muhammad of Amalek is Moshe Rabbeinu. The connection is Chassidus to Moshe. That when Moshe held his hands up, that we're winning the war, and when, God forbid, he did not, it weakened them. Because in order to fight the paralyzing effect of doubts, the paralyzing effect of coldness and apathy, you need something more powerful. When it's very cold outside, you can't just say, oh, I just want to have an average temperature. You need extra heat. You need extra warmth. And that comes by connecting to something. So the connection to Moshe Rabbeinu, this Chassidus to Moshe, is the way you fight doubts. When you hear Moshe Rabbeinu say something, and there's Vadei Hashem Tilasecha, that this is with a vadois, with a certainty, and not just a certainty, a regular human certainty, a divine certainty. And you have that takeoff, that intensity, that is the counter effect to the doubts that Amalek throws into us. It's so easy to throw cold water on somebody, because it takes one fool to burn down a barn that 1,000 wise people build. All you got to do is like knimit noz, which means to essentially just be dismissive, be cynical, be skeptical, and you throw cold water on the whole idea and you create doubts. Once you doubt, you're in a state of paralysis. Anyone looking for a shidduch and is trapped by doubts knows what I'm talking about. There's doubts that we have in different times of our life, how to resolve an issue. And you get stuck staying on the fence. That is far worse than making a mistake. So the way you proceed is by connecting to the Moshe of the generation, and that connection and following those guidelines with a certainty, knowing this is the mission that we were set out to do, is the best way to counter the forces of Amalek. Which is with connection, of course, to the parsha Tetzaveh. Tetzaveh is the only parsha in the Torah where Moshe Rabbeinu is not mentioned, for one of the reasons, because it's the week of Zayin Adar, usually, when Zayin Adar is both the Yemeledes, but also the Stalkus of Moshe. So it's like a remez in the Torah where Moshe is not mentioned, and also it's a hint to Moshe when he said to the Eibishter, Macheni no mesifrecha, erase my name from your book, if you're not going to forgive the Jews for the Chet HaEgel. So though that was a one-time event, we still remember it because we remember the Mesiras Nefesh of a leader for his people. It's not the Macheni we want to remember, the erasing, that he was ready to give his whole spiritual life, not just his physical life, his whole soul, his whole destiny, his whole future connection to Sefer Mechenina Mesifracha, for Sefer HaChaim, Teres Chaim, to preserve his people. So Chassidus explains, the Rebbe brings it down in many places, Va'ata Tetzaveh, Va'ata is going on who? On Moshe. It doesn't say his name, but it says Va'ata. Chassidus explains, Ata is the etzem of something. When you say you to somebody, you're saying the whole you. So Moshe is a name. And like any name, it has a definition. It's a very profound definition. It reflects on Moshe's connection to the Shmit Harishen, as he says in Teira'er, that he's rooted in the waters, the spiritual waters of Almadis, Kasi, the hidden worlds, and all the deep biyurim of Moshe's level of how his root of Moshe's soul comes from. But yet, Ato is even deeper. So when you say the Eibishter has names, for example, Havaya, Shema Etzem, definitely the lower names, the Shiva and Shemesh, Ein Chokim, the 7 names you don't erase, Alakim, Kael, Tzvokes, Shaddai, and so on. Havaya is the Shem Etzem, but it's still a name with 4 letters, Yud Kei Vav Kei. Comes the Zohar and says Anechi. When it says Anechi Hashem Elokech, what's Anechi? The Lo Yisram is Le B'Shum Eis v'Le B'Shum Keis. It's a name that reflects on the Etzem, the divine essence that's beyond the name. Someone asks you, tell me, who are you? So you can describe what you do, you can describe your skills, you can describe the sum total of all your qualities and all your personality type and so on. But it's still, at the end of the day, it's a definition. Ato means the etzem of you. The you that's even beyond the conscious expression, the you that is beyond anything that's defined. So that's Ato Haresel Adas is Ato Adu Atzmus, as the Alter Rebbe teaches, and Ato Tetzaveh is the etzem of Moshe, which is even deeper than the Gilui of Moshe, even the name Moshe. So the etzem of Moshe is the force that when we connect to, when the etzem of a person, etzem of a Id, the Yechida of the Id, goes into Yechidas by Rebbe, the Yechida meets the Yechida, and as such, the etzem, the power, gives us the power to overcome every challenge, including the Chet HaEgel, Mechenina Mesifracha. The etzem, Moshe had to invoke his core connection on the deepest level that's beyond any type of revelation, and it gives us the power to challenge and overcome and prevail over this Amalek in our lives. Amalek, Reish is going Amalek, that power of Amalek. Famous story, the last Maimorim and Sichos of the Rebbe Rashab, before Beis Nissen, Tofresh Pei. So he said that last Maimar Reish is going Amalek, which also became the first Maimar of the Frierdiker Rebbe. So it's known that Purim, which would be the last Purim by Almadein of the Rebbe Rashab. So the Rebbe Rashab was very much in a very expansive state, Purim, and it was Farbringing. And the table, there was a Magbis for Purim. So they would collect money, which was one of the greatest sins in the Soviet Union of the time, the Bolsheviks. And in walked in a few spies. And everybody got very frightened. The Frierdiker Rebbe Rashab was sitting there, and he was farbringing without any change, and the money was there on the table. And the Frierdiker Rebbe even, and others said to the Rebbe Rashab, Sasakona Mamish. The Rebbe Rashab says they come from Klippas, Amalek. Und Klippas is heder. Man darf nur stehen betekev mit Eir, but bederach mamel and his battle werden kol heder. And as the Rishimis of the Sikhs speak about it in the Potato Shalom and other places that this is cited, that surprising to everyone, shocked that these people just walked out. They saw the money, they saw the gathering. All of it was crimes talking about capital crimes. And yet they walked out. The Rebbe Rashab was able to invoke that koyach that was able to mevatel the Amalek of the time. And this is something each of us, thank God we don't have to come onto situations like that, but today we have it in a far more insidious and far more subtle way, the cancer of Amalek that infects each of us, the doubts, the complacency, the shrugging with the shoulders, there's always tomorrow. The Rebbe went to war against apathy. So in this Pasha Zochor, V'ata Tetzaveh, connecting to the Ata of the Rebbe, gives us the power to counter all that, those voices of doubt, those voices of questions, those voices of kaltkeit, and of course chutzpah itself, which we soon shall address in a continuation of last week's episode, the chutzpah of Amalek, and the chutzpah l'malyusa, chutzpah l'griyusa. Sometimes to fight the chutzpah of Amalek, you need to have a chutzpah in the positive side. And we'll get to that. So with that said, let's continue. Many comments came in follow up to the last 2 episodes in discussing the painful subject of violation, of the personal violation and abuse and of molestation of children in general whole sexual boundary issue, which is unfortunately an epidemic in many ways of our times. So I want to continue and address it. Obviously, I referred to what was discussed in the past 2 episodes, especially last week at length, about many, many factors. I'm not going to go over that again. But I will continue the addressing, especially a few topics that came up, and that is to distinguish between different levels. Frankly, it's not very tasteful to talk about these matters. So, and of course, I say viewer discretion advised. But on the other hand, not to talk about them is maybe even bigger problem, because this topic alone has brought a lot of amalek and confusion in our lives. Many people, what do you do? What don't you do? And so on. So I cannot say with any less uncertain terms the following. Our children are our most precious commodity. The neshamas of children, al tigu b'mashiche. The success of anything we'll do will be how well we will bring up our children. This is the generation, the next generation, and how our children are. That's how they will influence their children. So there's nothing greater than a person can do is preserve the Tara and the Gedusha of Hevel Shal Tenekes Shal Beis Rabban, both boys and girls, in every possible way. The fact that people, due to either their illnesses, due to their perversions, their deviations, their deviances, due to their own psychological pathology, are able to hurt children in ways that they may not even be aware of, in ways that have such deep impact, is something that we must eradicate. Simple as that. And it could be eradicated if all of us are aware, bring awareness, all in a subtle way. We're not talking here about hurting anybody, but not allowing zero tolerance for this, and not in our homes, not in our schools, not in our camps, not any place where children congregate. Now, frankly, the truth is that sexual purity should be in all levels, whether it's children, teenagers, adults, and so on. But children who are the most unprotected, meaning the most defenseless and vulnerable, obviously on the top of the list. So anything you see, anything you even are chesed, or have a question, go to someone that you can speak to confidentially, because you obviously don't want to just raise an alarm where there is nothing to be raised, and start becoming paranoid about every situation. But zero tolerance, especially in our homes, because homes, there's no one there to regulate. Unfortunately, in homes, when anything infiltrates there, it's one of the worst type of crimes, because it's in the safety, the place that's supposed to be so safe, their safe environment. A child has nothing but their home. And though the Rebbe didn't speak about it in the negative sense, but from the positive emphasis, you can understand that the Rebbe was talking about how to bring up a kosher, Chassidishe environment. And that obviously touches upon this area, which is so vital in the purity of a child's upbringing. So I want to discuss, because the question has been asked is, can you distinguish between one level or another level of so-called violation? Is there a difference between a perpetual and a one-time offender? Okay. I've received many letters about this itself. How could you compare the two? Suggesting that I was comparing. First of all, I didn't get into all the details. I wasn't comparing. I was talking about the etzem. And it's a good question. Can we distinguish? Is someone condemned for life just because they one time did, or ever, and offended, were sexual offended another human being, violated another person? Is there a way to distinguish, for example, between an adult and a child, and two so-called consenting adults, what someone called here adolescent experimentation, teenage experimentation, where you could argue that it doesn't have the same element of an authority, abusing authority, but there it's like experimentation. So I'll address that as well. The question of publicizing a violator. Even though we addressed it, I'll address that also further. And finally, the discussion of, not finally, 2 more things. The ability to heal and to do teshuva. Can an offender do teshuva? The recovery process. Because I did cite, which some of you pointed out and more offended by what I cited, I did not say I agree, actually I said I don't agree, that some professionals say this is one of the crimes or illnesses, whatever you want to call it, that are notoriously difficult, if not impossible, to heal from. At the same time, I said that a Chassidus al Pitera, there's nothing you cannot heal from. If a person wants, there's nothing that stands in the way of teshuva. Nothing, absolutely nothing. So from a Torah point of view, everything can be healed. It may be difficult. It may be very difficult in this situation. So I want to answer these questions, and they were very painful, many of these letters that came to me. I'd rather not read them all at length because for many different reasons. But this is essentially what it comes down to. To clearly define what crosses the line from experimentation, even with an unconsenting adult, especially unconsenting, to full-on assault, and specifically speaking in language that is somewhat couched, because I don't want to use language that's not sneezdik and so on. I mentioned the Alpi halacha. We follow what medical professionals say, and medical professionals all say, pe echad, which means unanimous, that sexual violation of somebody is destructive. Period. There's no dissenting voice. Once they say that, so halacha takes on a whole new dimension. That means it becomes the din of a reidif. A reidif is like a man running with a knife in his hand, a person violent with a knife. There's a whole different approach when you're talking about pekuach nefesh. Yes, here it may not be a knife in the physical sense, but it could be even worse than a knife because it's ongoing, as we discussed. So, I reiterate again, when you know that, then you take a whole different take on the whole subject. So, overall, I'll say the following, and soon we'll get into the distinctions. Every type of violation of the purity of a person's intimate self, which God blessed us with the power of Keyach Ein Sof, which is why sexuality in the first place has such power. Why does it have such power? It's not just as an assignment, as a test. It's because wherever there's greatness, there's power. The only ability that we have, the only opportunity we have to create a child, Keyach Ein Sof, as Chassidus says, is in the birth of a child, is through the intimacy in a sacred way between a husband and a wife. The only way the Zochor and the Keva Bara Esam come together and recreate the divine image is through intimacy. So intimacy has tremendous divine power. It's essentially the divine essence expressed in our lives. Think of it like the Holy of Holies. I addressed this at length earlier episodes in the beginning of this series, in the beginning when we started the series about the power of sexuality. We call the power of intimacy. It's actually the word sexuality I'm using simply because it's a way people express themselves. But intimacy is the right word. Yediyah, the Torah calls it. V'yada adam eschava, yediyah, to know. And to know is not just to understand or to conceive. Chacham and Bina, das is intimate knowledge. It becomes one with you. So intimacy is one of the greatest, if not the greatest power in life. Kodesh Kodashim. The Holy of Holies you don't enter whenever you like. Because we live in a world that's not as holy. And therefore, to preserve that sanctity of a person's arayis, so to speak, his intimate sense is one of the most paramount obligations that we have. Society, communities, schools, educators, and parents. This must be conveyed to everyone. This does not have to be conveyed in a negative way. It's to be conveyed in a positive way. Focus on the positive. The Ramban wrote an entire letter that many Chassanim learn before their marriages. Some say, and I believe this is the case, that Ramban wrote it to counter the misconceptions and the stereotypes around sexuality. People think of it as a necessary evil, as an ugly thing, dover maguna, dover moos, as he puts it there. And in many ways it's a Christianized version of sexuality, that it's not a Jewish version. And to set the record clear, in Reishis Chochmah, we talks about this at length. It's about Tara. Tara's the Tara and the purity involved around this activity, so to speak. But it's more than activity, it's about relationships in a pure way. This must be taught. So yes, even experimentation on the most minimal sense is already a violation. I'm not going to compare it, as we'll see in a moment, to a person who's a criminal and violence. People have nisyanis, we have taivas, we have temptations, but the best way to fight it is not to tell somebody that your hair is going to fall out, or that you're going to burn in the hell of snow or hell of fire, and all the negatives. Is to lift people up and say, God gave you a part of Himself. He gave you the Holy of Holies, the power to create. So if you have to protect all of your body, how much more so this most sacred part of your Holy of Holies? And if you spoke about it in that positive way and people understand the impact of violating that boundary and how that impacts for so long and for generations, that alone will help, no question, weaken the temptation and the need for this type of experimentation. So any type of violation is already a problem, let's be honest. That's how it is, because you crossed the line. Now, of course, we have to distinguish between that and distinguish between full-out assault on someone else. Especially we're going now the other extreme of an authority, a teacher, a therapist, a rov, a mashpia, Rahman al-Islam, I don't even want to mention it. Because there, in addition to just the plain violation, which is even on, I said, the most basic level, even two friends that are 15 years old, here now you have the additional, the trust, the responsibility, the distortion in the child's mind of, look, my teacher, the one's supposed to be teaching me about God and about what's right and the values, can behave in that type of fashion. The confusion that creates, the amolik that creates in the wiring of a person. So any type of sexual inappropriate behavior plays with the internal wires of the intimate self, of the Holy of Holies within us, but especially when you're dealing with a person who's in a state of authority. Which is why even in legal, secular law, there's a big difference of a person with a minor, an adult and a minor. Because now, from our point of view, two adults is also a problem. But an adult and a minor adds a whole element of criminal element, even more destructive forces because of the imbalance and so on. And of course, there's a big difference between a one-time and repeated. If you're talking about repeated offender, then you're talking about an addiction, you're talking about a person who is simply not just a reidiv that ran with a knife once, he's running with a knife every time he has a knife, he's able to run with a knife. So of course you can't compare them in the sense of the vigilance and in the sense of also the so-called punishment or the need to publicize a person like that. Because that person is simply a danger to society. To send them away from one city so he should be a danger to another city, it's like sending a murderer, he murdered people here, now send him somewhere else to murder. So that is repeated, that's a person who's out of control. And since he can't control himself, he has to be controlled by others. So either you put that person in prison, or if that doesn't work, or for whatever reason, statute of limitations, so then absolutely you have to do whatever is possible to make sure that people know this person is an offender. But remember, the focus here has to be on the positive, but then when you see there's a criminal offense, obviously you do what you have to do. Because preventive medicine is always the best. Now about a one-time offender, it's complicated because the person who was offended, the person that was violated, will say, what do I care whether he did it to 1,000 people, to 1 million people, or to... my life has been destroyed. And there's a point to that. In other words, malikot lekula, malikot lepalga. So because you murdered one person doesn't mean, and you didn't murder 50 people, doesn't make it less. It's a qualitative violation. Yet, I think from the perspective of the community, perspective of people who deal with the healing of it, you have to distinguish, because obviously, if a person shows true remorse, whether they were abused first, which is not an excuse, but definitely made it more conducive that they would do it to someone else, and there's a true remorse, and you see there's no repeat violation, and you see them going in a transparent way to therapy, there's no question that has to be approached in a different fashion. Now, from the perspective of the person who was violated, obviously, if he wants restitution or whatever it may be, you have to deal with that. The offender has to deal with that individual. But we're talking about from a perspective of a responsible perspective, and this brings me now to the doing of teshuva. This is the key thing. I saw a video of someone who in Yerushalayim who was violated by a son of a rebbe, and he made a video out of it, and he turned it into a whole vendetta. But interestingly, he did it in a very responsible fashion. He found the person who had violated him when he was younger, and he finally met with him. He refused to meet, but then he basically threatened him and said to him, if you don't meet with me, I will publicize this. They met, it's on video, you don't see a face, and his ultimatum to him was the following. I either publicize who you are and destroy your family and your reputation and all that, or you admit what you did, you apologize to me, to anyone else that you did this to, and you begin going to therapy on a weekly basis, and the condition is that your therapist must report to me that you're coming, and you're doing what has to be done. The man resisted initially, but then he really had no choice. It was blackmail. But this is what the fellow gave him the opportunity to do. I don't know the end of the story. But he began going to therapy. He apologized, all begrudgingly. He wasn't willing. He had to use the stick. but he did it, and he didn't publicize his name. So I am not here to advocate one method or another, but it's just interesting to observe and study, because you're dealing with a situation which notoriously people deny. They find friends and family to help cover it up by saying, no, this person is not capable, or they did full teshuva, they're completely healed, and so on. If there is indeed a show, an objective parties can show that a person isn't truly going into rehab and is transparent and not hiding anything, because this person cannot afford to hide anything. He can't say, it's my own private thing. No, it's no longer private once you offended someone else. There's no privacy anymore. The question is whether the whole world will know about it or only a few professionals. And by not allowing yourself to speak to someone or saying, it's between me and God, well, you're opening yourself up then that you're not ready for true teshuva. Everyone who knows the laws of Mechila, the laws of teshuva, Ben Adam Lamokim, knows Yom Kippur doesn't even help. You need to speak to the person who you hurt. So if you have professionals and people involved who full transparency and this demonstrates, and professionals say, yes, this person is coming every week or every day or whatever it is, and there is progress and there's challenges as well, then absolutely, from a Torah point of view, what's the question? We for the worst crimes, we allow people to do teshuva. But there are strict conditions. To hide behind the mantle of teshuva, I'm doing teshuva, leave me be, I'm davening, I'm learning Chassidus, I'm doing mivtzayim. It's all nice and good. You need objective parties to testify. And I repeat again, objective parties, not family members, not yourself. A person like that can't be trusted, obviously. The history shows. Then there's absolutely ability to allow them to do teshuva. And I would even argue not to publicize who they are, if they follow these guidelines. Again, I don't want to be the final say on this matter. I'm just giving a suggestion that I think could work. And if indeed that person shows that type of remorse, but all the conditions, and they're harsh conditions. Remember, in the laws of Mechila, the person who's been hurt can choose not to be meichel you, not to forgive you, if they think that you need to be broken more. That's what it says in Hilchos Yom Kippur. Read the Alter Rebbe Shulchan Aruch. We talked about that as well in a previous episode. So absolutely teshuva is possible. And that would be, of course, the difference between, let's say, a one-time person and then they do true teshuva. Maybe teshuva their whole life. And a repeat obviously has much less, give them less rope, because that person is less trustworthy. So it's a sensitive and difficult topic. And I want to just sum up and say, yes, there are distinctions. I wouldn't just put everything in the same pot. However, let's start again. Sexuality is the most sacred thing in our lives, intimacy. Any violation, even one time, even experimentation between two adults should be unacceptable. Now, we live in a world where things happen. But we have to have a standard, and the standard has to be that's not everyone's doing it. The standard is the highest possible standard the Torah sets up for us, to be divine human beings. And the most divine part of you is your sexuality, is your intimacy, is your power to give birth, both for men and for women. And that has to be preserved more than anything else in existence. Taras HaMishpacha. And then there's the levels that I spoke about, where you're already getting into criminal activity, into violations of trust, authority, responsibility, and ultimately, when you talk about real criminal, repeated, addicted, people who are out of control, these people should be off the streets, should never be in touch with any child. Not just that, they should be forced in every possible way, because they're a danger. They're a danger to themselves, they're a danger to their families, they're a danger to society. Simple as that. And to minimize it is frankly part of the crime. So once we know the effect it has on people, we need to know the sanctity of it and the holiness of it. It's not a little game where you say, we played a little game in the park or something. You're dealing here with the most sacred things that God has given us, and things that can become irreversible, because the haunted memories, the haunting thoughts, the self-loathing, the shame, the guilt associated with this is deeply profound and remains with someone for a long time and affects their own lives, their own sexuality, their own love, their own relationships. So we're not just talking about a minor thing here. So that, I believe, ties up some of the knots. There's a few more things I wanted to address when this one question was asked about mikveh, where unfortunately is tragically the place that's supposed to bring so much purity and holiness can become a place of crime. So absolutely you have to have ways to enforce whatever is possible in a mikveh. Besides, you can't just trust people. I'm not saying you can have a guard inside there, but you have to have definitely ways, and that has to be put our heads together, how to figure out how the most sacred place should definitely not become a place of Rahman al-Itzlan, of such violation. Mokum shal Peronius is the ultimate table of V'sheres biyodei, if you want to put it in that sense of the word. And then the question that was asked, another question was about parents. So someone wrote me a note, which I suspect was written by a parent, because it so advocates the trust and the derech eretz one has to say. To parents, and they quote to me the following in the laws of Kibbud Av V'Eim. The person writes, though not a victim, I grew up with lots of fighting with my parents, physically even longer after I'm an adult. Looking back, I'd rather blame poverty than my parents growing up. I've seen every frum psychologist, psychiatrist, therapist within a 100-mile radius of New York City. That's quite a number of therapists. And now as an adult, I've been seeing nearly every kind of therapy short of raw avodah zarah to deal with my personal issues. There's only one single thing that I found useful for me. For reasons beyond me, I decided to have a serious look at the halachas of Kibbud Av V'Eim. And he reads, Ad heichem Kibbud Av V'Eim, afilu notel kishel zehuvim shalei v'shlichu lefron of liyam, lo yachli meisan, v'lo yitzig b'fneim, v'lo yichus kenegdem, el yikabel gzeres hakosav v'yishtek, v'yorim emelech malchei amlachim shetzivu b'kach. I'll translate for those that need translation. That to what extent does one have to honor parents? That even if they took a kiss, a wallet, a pocketbook of money, of zuhuvim, of his coins and his money, and they threw it into the sea, you should not admonish them. You should not yell at them. You shouldn't get angry at them, because you have to accept that gzeira. So you have to accept God's gzeira decree and be quiet, and be afraid of the God that gave us the commandment to honor our parents. So he says, personally, I've burned the words into memory, and I can tell you that this is the single most important advice I have ever had. It does not dismiss my pain or my anger to my parents. In fact, it validates it, yet I feel like there is someone or something invisible that knows this pain and wisely supports me while I shut my mouth. It takes mental effort, but when it's over, there is within me an enormous relief. I can never fathom why would God want someone to remain silent when attacked by a parent who, due to severe poverty, is possessed by a monster. But it seems Rav Yosef Kairoi or Eliyahu Novi understood my situation, because they urge this. And he goes on to speak about how he's tried to reconcile with his parents. And therefore, please tell your audience how critical it is to practice restraint and put a show of respect to the parent, not to lash back at the father or mother for any type of abuse that was. Before an accident, the Shulchan Aruch is okay with trying to prevent a loss. And after an incident, before an incident, I should say, not accident, it's fine to claim for any financial loss, but it's imperative that one accepts it, as the Shulchan Aruch says. Tell your audience that even if they are injured, if they care for what the Shulchan Aruch has to say, show respect to the parent. Well, yes, this is correct, but it's interesting, the example you quoted from Shulchan Aruch is if they take your wallet of money and they throw it, which would cause many people to be furious, but it does not talk about necessarily a parent murdering a child or a parent sexually abusing a child. So I just want to make this very clear qualification. There's a halacha in Torah that if a parent tells you to do something hepech haTorah, you're not supposed to listen to them. So ad heichen Kibbud Av V'Eim, until God, because there's a God that's greater than the parents. And if the parents tell you to do something the Torah says not, the answer is no, you have to listen to God, because also your parents have to listen to God, which is why Kibbud Av V'Eim is a mitzvah in the first 5 luchas, the first luach, and the first 5 commandments, bein adam lamokim, as we discussed once at length. So if it comes to criminal activity and abuse, obviously preventive would be great. I do not know if Kibbud Av V'Eim then reflects that you have to just swallow it and ignore it and accept it. If you do that, you may be causing severe damage to you and to your family and to your children. And I do not believe that halacha would say that honoring your parents at the expense of killing you or killing your family and relationship. Would you say the same thing, for God forbid, if your parents hurt your wife or did something really, really inappropriate with your children? Now you're dealing then with a whole different reality and a whole different situation. So this needs, of course, more discussion, but I just wanted to qualify that. And finally, one more thing on this topic. You mentioned, someone wrote, that experts say that there's no recovery for pedophiles. I would like to bring to your attention that for the history of the world, no one knew of recovery for alcoholics. And then in the 1930s, through trial and error, Alcoholics Anonymous was born, and through it and its 12 steps, literally dozens upon dozens of types of addictions have found the method for recovery. This has succeeded in each and every country it has been tried. He goes on to all the different addictions. So why not say the same thing regarding this thing? My question is as follows. Say a pedophile wishes to recover, where should they return to? To a psychologist or a psychiatrist who was convinced by their textbooks that there's no recovery? Perhaps the time has come for a 12-step program of recovery from molesters and pedophiles. Well, this question I've answered earlier, but I'll just reiterate and say, from a Torah point of view, everybody can do teshuva. I said what experts say. That doesn't mean I agree with them. The experts say this because they're looking at statistics and they're looking at how notoriously difficult it is to heal something that people won't acknowledge and will never, it comes to alcoholism, drug abuse and so on, gambling and other things, even porn addiction, people will acknowledge it, go to therapy and do their best. When it comes to whatever reason, violations, especially of children, this is notoriously denied by everybody. Even if there's proof, they deny it and so on and so forth. So therefore, other measures may be necessary. However, as I said, everyone can do teshuva, and it starts with accountability and transparency. And I won't reiterate everything I said before about this topic. Okay, as you can imagine, this is very loaded emotionally, and it's not easy to talk about, but I felt I wanted to address it as much as possible. And ultimately also say, in a final note about families, that no one's guilty by association. But the fact of the matter that a family will be hurt if indeed someone in their family is exposed to be a violator is very painful. So number one, this just underscores even more the importance of not making sure to deal with it, the families, before it gets public. And then you can come and wring your hands and say, well, why should we be hurt? We weren't part of it. If you knew about it before, you are part of it, my friends. What can I say? If you didn't, you're innocent. I feel bad. But to suggest that suddenly we're not going to deal with perpetrators because some people may get hurt is ridiculous. That would be like saying we're not going to deal with a murderer because his family is going to be hurt because they're going to find out he's a murderer. It doesn't work that way. At the same time, a community has to be careful not to stereotype and stigmatize people just because they have someone in their family that was a violator. I know we tend to do this, and a lynch mob is an equal crime. To become a lynch mob and just jump on anybody, it has to be done, as I said, in a balanced way, not out of anger, not out of vendettas and vengeance, in a balanced way where you demand accountability and so on. Stronger measures if a person just b'shumei in no way wants to do anything about it. But it has to be done sensitively, even with a perpetrator, let alone with their family. So it has to be done if people deal with this, and not two wrongs make a right, but they deal with it sensitively, but firmly. No question we can bring more healing and less damage. But will there be collateral damage from soul murder, from hurting people in very deep ways? Unfortunately, I don't know a way around that. There's collateral damage, and the criminals are the ones to be held accountable, not the police who are arresting them, or those that are trying to help them, or help the situation, or help the community. And finally, what Chassidus does to help us heal from abuse, the question, what does Chassidus do? Well, everything I've said here, I believe, does not come from secular psychology. It comes from Torah views on a person, a human being. The way we look at sexuality and intimacy is a Chassidishe look. The way we deal with it once something, God forbid, happens, to deal with it, as I said, in a sensitive way, but in a firm way, and not let anyone just pull the wool over our eyes because they're doing teshuva, but it has to be transparent and accountable. And ultimately, learning Chassidus. You learn Chassidus, a neshama veiksach, and soaks in the waters of Mei Hadas HaToher, of a mikveh. Mei Hadas HaToher is you cleansing your own self, you're cleansing your own intimacy, both in preventing, God forbid, violations, and even if there is, this is one of the ways. But that cannot be enough. You still have to have remorse, and you need the transparency, and you need the professional help. So someone can't just say, I throw myself into Chassidus. And tevel v'sheretz b'yodeh. That doesn't work that way. But Chassidus has the power to go into the inner wiring of our own intimate self, like the famous sikha that I quoted from Pada V'Shalom, Yiteskis of Tofrei Shayin Daled, where the Rebbe Rashab talks about this topic and says that only Chassidus is the solution to sexual violations, even self-violating. And he talks about how Chassidus goes into that etzem. We discussed this as well in many episodes earlier. I don't recall the number exactly, but you can find it easily in the timestamps and the tags of the previous episodes of my life. Okay, let me go to now another subject, which was chutzpah. Obviously, I welcome more questions on this topic, and I hope I've addressed at least some of the angles. As always, online, how much can you address when you're not dealing with case by case and personalization? So I have to qualify that and apologize if anything sounded more like a platitude. But the fact of the matter is, I believe I try to speak specifically as well. But ultimately, help cannot just be done online like this. You need to talk to someone individually, and not just suffice with the principles that I just laid out here. Okay, Chutzpah. So last week we spoke about how a system has to not tolerate chutzpah and lack of mashmas, lack of respect for authority, especially students and so on. But it was pointed out, and of course this is a follow-up, that isn't chutzpah, especially in the Chassidishe community, Chabad community, come from some of the positive elements that we learn about having the teikif and the confidence that's necessary to survive, not just to survive, but to influence this hostile world. So let's address that. Basically, is there a border? How do you distinguish between appropriate and inappropriate chutzpah? What are the roots of where chutzpah sometimes come from? And how do you make sure that it doesn't spill over in the wrong possible way? So let's read a few questions, and then hopefully try to address as much as I can. What I cannot address, I'll continue in the next episodes. So one person writes, does a chassid not need to be overly confident in order to go out on shlichus, putting ourselves on the front line, exposing us and our children to everything? Confidence and chutzpah are our safeguards. Without it, we may be tempted by other ways. What is the balance between the confidence, which can be misinterpreted as chutzpah, needed for Jewish pride, and coming off as arrogant? And then, my good dear friend and colleague, the Mashpia Hayudua in Melbourne, Australia, Rabbi Yaakov Winner, Yankee Winner, wrote me a very beautiful few correspondence on this topic, and I want to thank him because he gave me many sources that I would like to address and in dealing with this issue. So, essentially, if you look in the Rebbe Sichos, the Rebbeim Sichos, I should say, the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Rebbe Rashab, you'll find there's two things when they address the issue of chutzpah. On one hand, they talk about the fact of the matter is, because we have the teikif of knowing that we're chassidim, that we should have a sense of a neflinu, of a certain sense of pride, of standing out and knowing you have to make a kiddush Hashem and a kiddush Chabad, a kiddush Lubavitch. So that creates a certain sense of that you can't spill over into sensing superiority. So he quotes. So one of the quotes that is a sikha from the Frierdiker Rebbe, one of the last sikhas that he said when he was still in Poland, in Lita, I should say, in Latvia, before he came over to the United States, is in Sefer HaSichos, Tzadik Vav Tovshin, at the end, page 359. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says that everything needs to have a certain type of starkheit. Limud Chassidus with a teikif, with a pride, with a self-confidence. The Chassidishe teikif is the richtige tev, is the true good, is a Chassidishe teikif. You have Chassidic pride and confidence, and you're not in spol, you're not affected by others. But then he says, "Oh, but it says doch ein tev b'lei ra." There's no good without evil in this world. Amol is do heder amashmas to the letter. There are times where there can be a lack of respect to the teachers, or a dismissal of parents. But das is kegen the hebt you say this from Teres Chassidus. That goes against, that defies the main fundamentals and foundations of Chassidus. He says he's very much hurt if he sees, he was talking to girls actually, to students, if he sees such lack of respect. So at the same time, he quotes that there's a certain type of confidence, and yet you have to be careful that it should not spill over. That's one aspect that you find. On the other hand, there's another aspect, which is that due to the fact, and this goes to Sichos, I want to quote a few Sichos, especially Vayetze Tovshin Mem Gimel. Vayetze Tovshin Mem Gimel, the Rebbe addressed something that he addressed a number of times, where you don't find that many times the Chassidim are called to, even though they have a Reb in a respectful way, they didn't use the word Reb. They would say Michal, they would say other names, David Tzvi, Radatz, without always using the word Harav, even though David Hirschel the Rebbe brings. And you find that Chassidim, to other Chassidim, don't show the respect and the cover that you have to give someone with a title. So the Rebbe said, he was looking for halacha, a mocker in halacha, until he found the Gemara in Shabbos, Daf Nun Vav Amud Aleph, that Uriah Hachiti was a Merid B'Malchus. A Merid B'Malchus is someone who rebels, a rebel. A Merid B'Malchus is Chayiv Misa. It's a very serious crime for someone to defy and to mutineer against the king. But why was he this? Because because when he was standing before David HaMelech the king, he called Yev with a Teir Shel Kavod, Adeni Yev, my master Yev. So in other words, in light of the Rebbe standing there, the Melech standing there, and he gave the Torah to someone else, that was considered a type of mutiny. And the Rebbe goes on, by Chassidim, it's always engraved in their hearts and souls that they always imagine the Rebbe. So according to this Gemara, since they feel that Bala Shmo Emed Kenegdei, like the person who said this is standing there, when you're repeating the words of the Rebbe, so there's no room for anything else. So though on one hand you could say, 1 second, isn't there respect for other people? Yes. But there's this element of takeif. I mean, you could say these both things of where sometimes Chassidishe chutzpah can spill over into the wrong type of chutzpah comes, number one, from the self-confidence, number two, from that connection to what I said, Ve'ata Tetzaveh, to the Rebbe himself. But at the same time, I don't want anyone to misunderstand what I'm saying. That even though there is a root for it, at the same time the Rabbeim were very, very adamant that it should not spill over in a negative way. And that it should be done always in a kedushadik way, in a humble way. To become a mechutzev, which is Amalek, Klippa of Amalek, is not the kavanah here. But I did want to qualify the topic. So again I say, it's absolutely unacceptable. Chutzpah is considered one of the worst midas, Reishis Goyim Amalek. At the same time, there is an element of self-confidence that a person has to have. So how do you reconcile the two? You reconcile it because the self-confidence that we have to have is not coming from us. It's representing what God wants from us. It's the bittul that brings that type of self-confidence. Because you're so bottled to the Eibishter, to the Rebbe, because you're so dedicated, not because you're such an arrogant person you think you're better than everyone else. On the contrary, because you feel so humbled to the cause, so nothing in the world can frighten you. Like what the Baal Shem Tov heard from his father, don't be afraid of anything but God. That gave him a takeif, that gave him a confidence, a sense of strength and inner fortitude that he could deal with any challenge that came his way. So that's the asad. If it's coming from klippa, from within you, your arrogance, it happens to be, just ungeton, you dress up your arrogance, Chassidishe arrogance. That's not acceptable. But if it's coming from a bittul, the bittul to the source, and what the source wants, and then nothing affects. Mordechai didn't bow down, not because he was arrogant to Haman, because he was connected to the Eibishter. Yehudi. And therefore, Kefer b'Avodah Zarah. His denial of Haman was that we don't worship other human beings because we worship God. So it came from the bittul to Elikus, not from the takeoff against the world. And when you have bittul to the real emes, then nothing in the world can frighten you, like the Frierdiker Rebbe told Lulav when he pointed that pistol to him, Yud Beis Tammuz time. And he said, this toy can frighten, this tzazka can frighten someone that has one world and many gods. Not someone that has one God and two worlds. So it's coming from the bittul. So that chutzpah, that takeif that comes from bittul, is a whole different type of takeif. It's like the difference between shtuz the kedusha, shtuz the klippa. And that's the key thing that we have to remember. So there's many more sikhs about this topic, but this is the distinction. I will also cite the letter from the Rebbe, Rosh Hashanah Tavshin Chav Ches, very powerful letter. It's printed in Likutei Sichos, volume 9, page 451, 452. And there the Rebbe speaks about the importance of Kabbalah sale. And then he goes on, Kabbalah Sale, which means to accept the humble acceptance of a higher authority. He says, and this is true everywhere and at all times, even in our country and in our time. Though we live in a time in a country where people do not have that natural Kabbalah Sale, even there they can achieve it. Because here we value so much in this America, independence, individuality, personal rights, and people stand up for themselves and so on. The Rebbe says, Adrab, a person like that, when they come to understand what bittul is, then that bittul is a much healthier one. Their Kabbalah Sale is a healthier one. So the point here is two things here. That number one, the chutzpah is not coming from takif of arrogance, it's coming from bittul. And then later he said the bittul is not coming from weakness. Because we're a weak person, the person is very, very meek and very brittle, so very fragile, so anything can push him over. You're talking about the unbelievable takif, an unbelievable power within. And that brings a deeper bittul and a deeper takif. So in truth is, in this interesting twist of things, the arrogant person is not as intense and not as self-confident as the person that's connected to the truth. On the other hand, the person who has that intensity connected to the truth does not step on other people. Because it's coming not from him, it's coming from a higher source. So a few more things I'd like to quote about this. I'm just thinking whether there's time to do so. So I think I'll reserve it for the next episode. There's a few other stories that my colleague shared with me. But because of time limitations, I'm going to right now sum up this episode. And we'll address the rest in the coming episodes. So, Am Kshei Eiref is what the Torah says, that it's a nation with a very firm back, firm neck, Kshei Eiref, meaning very obstinate. But abstinence can be abstinence of Kedusha, could be abstinence of opposite of Kedusha. You find people who are abstinent in the most unhealthy ways. But then when the abstinence comes from Elokus, so you don't choose the Kedusha, which means a super-rational commitment, then you don't get affected by the winds of change in the world. So that comes from what Chassidishe takif really comes from. And at the same time, the fact that you have a Rebbe, and you're bottled to the Rebbe, like I said, Tetzaveh, you're connected to the core, gives you the ability to overcome all the negative and challenging forces in this world, and they're all both connected. I think this is a very good way to sum up the theme of Chassidus B'chlal, my life Chassidus applied. And finally, let me say, go back to the contest. I want to thank you again for those hundreds and hundreds, over 500 submissions. It's tremendous from people from all over the world. And it's exciting the judges are very excited to do the judging. I'm observing as well throughout the process, but I'm not involved in the direct judging. And thank you again for your participation in that. This has been Chassidus, My Life Chassidus Applied, episode 57. Everyone should have a very simchadik week, being that we're in the month of Adar. Ein simcha katoras asfekis, a simcha that helps us resolve doubts, and the other way around also by resolving and fighting the doubt by connecting to the source itself, Chassidus, and the Bali HaChassidus, which is the teachers of Chassidus, that helps us resolve all doubt and go forge ahead with certainty. Be well.